The market gives and the market takes away. This fundamental truth has broken more traders than any crash, any recession, any bear market in history, because the real damage isn't done by external events, it's inflicted by the mind that refuses to accept them. You don't lose because you're wrong. You lose because you refuse to be wrong. Jesse Livermore understood this brutal reality better than perhaps any trader who ever lived. The man who made and lost multiple fortunes, the equivalent of billions in today's money, knew that selling is where most traders fail, not because they can't identify when to sell, but because they won't. The psychological barrier isn't knowledge, it's discipline. Look at your own trading history. Those massive drawdowns, those account-destroying losses, they didn't happen because you didn't see the reversal coming. They happened because you saw it and chose to ignore it. You hoped, you prayed. You convinced yourself that temporary pain would lead to eventual gain. And that decision, that moment of psychological weakness, cost you everything. The most dangerous words in trading aren't "I don't know." They're just "a little longer." Livermore mastered selling not through some mystical market sense, but through a system of psychological discipline that protected him from himself. His approach wasn't about predicting the future, it was about respecting the present. When other traders were paralyzed by fear or consumed by greed, Livermore followed rules. When others told themselves stories about what might happen, Livermore responded to what was actually happening. The greatest risk in the market isn't price action, it's your reaction. What you're about to learn isn't just Livermore's method for determining when to sell. It's his system for removing emotion from the equation entirely. A framework that doesn't fight psychological weakness but sidesteps it completely, because the secret to successful selling isn't found in better indicators or more complex analysis. It's found in the courage to establish rules before you need them and the discipline to follow them when every instinct screams otherwise. In 1929, as Wall Street crumbled and fortunes evaporated in what would become the Great Depression, one man walked away with $100 million. While bankers jumped from windows and once wealthy men sold apples on street corners, Jesse Livermore had not only survived but thrived. Why? Because he knew exactly when to sell. But this wasn't always the case. Decades earlier, a teenage Livermore had arrived in Boston with nothing but $5 and a dream. Working as a quotation board boy in a brokerage office, he began to see patterns in the numbers, rhythms, and movements that seemed to predict what would happen next. He started making small bets in bucket shops, the unregulated gambling parlors of the financial world. And he won, again and again. By 19, Livermore had accumulated over $10,000, equivalent to hundreds of thousands today. He felt invincible. The market couldn't touch him. His system was perfect. Then came the loss that would change everything. In a single trade, his fortune disappeared, not because his entry was wrong, his analysis had been correct. Not because the market moved against him unexpectedly, it had followed exactly the pattern he anticipated. He lost because he didn't know when to sell. "I did precisely the wrong thing," Livermore later wrote. "The cotton showed me a profit and I wanted more. I waited and saw it turn into a loss, then I wanted to get out even. And then I saw it grow into a bigger loss, and I stayed because the next day would surely see a rally." That is hope, not logic. That is gambling, not investing. This pattern repeated throughout his career. Enormous gains followed by devastating losses. With each cycle, Livermore didn't just lose money, he lost his identity, his confidence shattered, his system questioned, his very character in doubt. But unlike most traders who experience such reversals, Livermore did something different. He studied his mistakes with ruthless objectivity. He documented every trade, analyzing not just the market conditions, but his psychological state when making decisions. What he discovered was that his failures almost always stemmed from the same root cause, a lack of discipline in selling. He could spot opportunity with uncanny accuracy. He could deploy capital with mathematical precision. But when it came time to exit, when emotion collided with logic, his system broke down. The market didn't beat Jesse Livermore. Jesse Livermore beat. This realization led him to develop a revolutionary approach to risk management. A system so simple in concept yet so difficult in execution that few traders have ever managed to follow it consistently. At its core was a profound understanding: the moment you enter a trade is when you must decide exactly when you'll exit. Not based on hope, not based on greed, not based on what others are doing, but based on clear, predefined rules that acknowledge the market's ultimate authority. This system, this psychological framework for handling risk, would eventually make Livermore one of the greatest traders in history. But first, he had to confront the greatest obstacle any trader will ever face: himself. The market doesn't care what you think. It doesn't care what you believe. It doesn't care what you deserve or what you need. The market simply is an impartial force that rewards discipline and punishes hope. Yet we approach it as if our opinions matter, as if our desires should influence outcomes, as if our ego deserves consideration from an entity that exists solely to transfer wealth from the emotional to the disciplined. This is the fundamental conflict at the heart of trading, the battle between what we want to be true and what actually is true. Livermore called it the costly graduation present that the market eventually gives every trader: the realization that personal desire has no bearing on market reality. Some receive this education early and at a small cost. Others receive it later, after their account has been decimated and their confidence destroyed. But everyone eventually receives this lesson. What makes it so difficult to sell at the right time? Why do we hold losing positions until they become catastrophic? Why do we take profits too early on winners, only to watch them continue upward without us? The answer lies not in market mechanics, but in human psychology. When a trade moves against us, selling means admitting we were wrong. It means accepting failure. It means confronting our fallibility in the most concrete terms possible. And the ego hates nothing more than facing its own limitations. So instead, we construct elaborate justifications. We focus on the original reason for the trade, ignoring new information that contradicts it. We average down, turning a tactical retreat into a doubling of risk. We tell ourselves stories about long-term investments when we're really just avoiding the pain of loss. Ask yourself, how many times have you transformed a trade into an investment simply because it moved against you? This is ego protection, not strategy. This is emotional reaction, not disciplined response. And it's exactly what Livermore sought to eliminate with his system. The human side of every person is the greatest enemy of the average investor or speculator, he wrote. The weaknesses that all people possess are fear and greed. Because of these emotions, many people are led to make foolish investment decisions. Fear and greed, these twin forces, distort perception and destroy discipline. They transform rational actors into gambling addicts, chasing losses and squandering gains. They convince the logical mind to embrace illogical actions. Fear tells us to sell winners too soon, afraid that profit will disappear. Greed tells us to hold losers too long, hoping for an impossible recovery. Together they ensure we do exactly the opposite of what successful trading requires, cutting losses short and letting winners run. But how do we overcome these fundamental human drives? Livermore's answer was radical in its simplicity. You don't overcome them, you bypass them entirely. A loss never bothers me after I take it, he explained. I forget it overnight. But being wrong, not taking the loss, that is what does the damage to the pocketbook and to the soul. Consider this insight carefully. The pain isn't in the loss itself, it's in the resistance to the loss. It's the psychological battle, the internal struggle against reality, that causes the real damage. Discipline, control, survival. These became Livermore's mantras: not profit, not wealth, not status, because he understood that without discipline, there can be no consistent profit. Without control, there can be no lasting wealth. Without survival, there can be no sustained success. His solution began with a fundamental shift in mindset. Every trade is temporary. Every position is a rental, not an ownership. The moment you begin to feel emotional attachment to a trade is the moment you've lost objectivity. Have you ever found yourself checking a losing position more frequently, as if your attention might somehow change its direction? This is the mindset of the gambler, not the professional. This is hope masquerading as strategy. Livermore replaced this emotional approach with a system of rules, immutable, non-negotiable directives that remove decision-making from the heat of battle. His most famous rule was devastatingly clear: cut losses at 10%. No exceptions, no justifications, no second chances. I always established a stop before making a trade, he wrote. I would determine where I was going to sell if the market moved against me. I did not wait to find out if I was wrong. Notice the language: if the market moved against me, not if I was wrong. This subtle distinction reveals a profound truth. The market moving against your position doesn't mean your analysis was flawed. It simply means that, in this moment, this trade isn't working. Divorcing ego from outcome allows for rational decision making, discipline, control, survival. But establishing rules is easy. Following them is hard. How many times have you created trading rules only to break them at the first sign of trouble? How many times have you moved your stop loss as the price approached it? The system fails not because the rules are wrong, but because the trader lacks the discipline to follow them. Livermore understood this challenge intimately. His solution was to make discipline easier by making breaking rules harder. He did this by committing his trading decisions to paper before entering a position, creating a contract with himself that specified exactly when he would sell, regardless of how he felt in the moment. By having a definite plan and writing it down, I could actually see what I was doing without allowing hope, fear, or greed to affect my decisions, he explained. This written commitment served as an external conscience, an objective reminder of what the rational mind had decided before emotion clouded judgment. When the moment of decision arrived, Livermore didn't have to wrestle with fear or greed. He simply had to follow instructions he had already given himself. But the true power of Livermore's stop-loss strategy wasn't just in limiting individual losses. It was in the cumulative psychological effect of consistent discipline. When you know exactly how much you can lose on any trade, fear diminishes. When you have a system for protecting capital, confidence grows. When you remove emotion from selling decisions, clarity emerges. Is a 10% loss painful? Of course. But is it survivable? Absolutely. Compare that to the undisciplined trader who allows losses to grow to 30%, 50%, or even 100% of their position. Each escalating loss doesn't just destroy capital, it destroys confidence. It creates psychological damage that affects every future trade. Discipline, control, survival. Livermore's approach transformed selling from an emotional reaction into a strategic action. It wasn't about being right all the time, it was about being wrong in a way that allowed him to fight another day. There is a time to go long, a time to go short, and a time to go fishing, he famously said. This wasn't just clever wordplay. It was a profound acknowledgement that sometimes the best position is no position at all. The ability to step away to preserve capital during unfavorable conditions was as important to Livermore as the ability to aggressively deploy capital during favorable ones. Both required the same fundamental quality: discipline. Have you developed the discipline to do nothing when conditions don't favor your strategy? This patient, disciplined approach didn't just save Livermore from catastrophic losses. It positioned him to capitalize on the truly significant opportunities that come to those who have preserved their capital and their confidence. In 1929, as the market began to crack, Livermore didn't have to overcome fear or greed to sell his long positions and go short. He didn't have to battle his ego or question his judgment. He simply had to follow his system, the same system that had protected him countless times before. The result wasn't just financial profit, it was psychological freedom. And that perhaps was Livermore's greatest discovery. The purpose of a selling strategy isn't just to preserve capital, it's to preserve the mind that controls the capital. Because without mental clarity, without emotional stability, even the greatest fortune will eventually disappear. Discipline, control, survival. So how exactly did Jesse Livermore's selling system work? What were the specific rules that allowed him to navigate markets with such precision? And most importantly, how can you adapt his century-old wisdom to modern trading? The framework begins with a fundamental principle: capital preservation comes before capital appreciation. Always. Livermore divided his system into three distinct components: the mechanical stop, the pyramiding method, and the reversal confirmation. Each addressed a specific psychological vulnerability that threatens trading success. First, the mechanical stop. Livermore's original stop-loss strategy. Unlike modern traders who set stops based on technical levels, support areas, or arbitrary percentages, Livermore used what he called the pain threshold method. He determined the maximum amount he could lose on any trade while maintaining complete emotional equilibrium, the point where loss caused no psychological distress. For most trades, this landed between 7–10% of position value. But crucially, this wasn't just a suggestion or guideline, it was an immutable law. When price hit this level, Livermore exited. No questions, no hesitation, no exceptions. I never argue with the tape, he insisted. Getting out when the market goes against you is the rule without exception. The power of this approach wasn't in the specific percentage, it was in the certainty. By predetermining his exit before entry, Livermore removed the need for decision-making during periods of stress. The rule made the decision for him. Consider implementing this in your own trading. Before entering any position, write down your exact exit price, not a mental note, a written commitment. This transforms a future emotional decision into a current rational one. The second component, Livermore's pyramiding method, addressed the challenge of letting winners run. Most traders struggle to hold profitable positions, taking small gains while missing the substantial moves. Livermore's solution was mathematical rather than emotional. Instead of holding the entire position as price moved in his favor, he implemented a scaling system. At predetermined profit levels, usually 10% intervals, he would sell a portion of his position, typically 20-25%. This accomplished two critical objectives. It removed initial capital from risk, and it eliminated the psychological pressure of protecting profits. By taking profits on a portion of my position as it moves in my favor, I'm playing with the market's money, he explained. This allows me to hold the remainder without fear. This methodical approach transformed the psychological dynamic. Rather than constantly questioning whether to take profits or hold for more, Livermore had a predetermined plan that satisfied both the desire for certainty and the ambition for larger gains. The third component, his reversal confirmation strategy, was perhaps his. Livermore understood that markets rarely reverse all at once. Instead, they give warnings, subtle signals that momentum is shifting. His method for identifying these signals was remarkably precise. When a stock that had been advancing consistently failed to make a new high for 3 consecutive days, Livermore would sell his entire position regardless of profit level. Conversely, when a declining stock failed to make a new low for 3 consecutive days, he would exit his short position. This 3-day rule wasn't based on superstition or arbitrary numbers. It recognized a fundamental market truth. Momentum changes direction before price makes dramatic moves. By exiting at the first sign of exhaustion, Livermore avoided the catastrophic reversals that destroy. The trend is your friend until it bends, as traders say today. Livermore simply codified the exact point at which the bend becomes evident. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Livermore's system was what happened after he sold. Rather than immediately looking for the next opportunity, he implemented a mandatory reflection period, a psychological cooling off that prevented emotional re-entry. After taking a loss, wait 24 hours before placing another trade, he advised. After 3 consecutive losses, stop trading for 30 days. This forced pause accomplished something remarkable. It broke the cycle of reactive trading that leads to compounding losses. By stepping away, Livermore allowed rationality to return before risking additional capital. How many of your worst trading decisions have come immediately after a loss? How often have you tried to get back what the market took only to dig yourself deeper? This cooling off period wasn't about punishing himself. It was about recognizing that judgment becomes impaired after losses. Rather than fighting this psychological reality, Livermore built it into his system. The complete framework: mechanical stops, pyramiding profits, reversal confirmation, and mandatory reflection, created something greater than the sum of its parts. It formed a comprehensive psychological defense system that protected Livermore not just from market volatility, but from his own emotional reactions to that volatility. This is the revelation at the heart of Livermore's approach. You don't need to become emotionally invulnerable to trade successfully. You simply need a system that functions despite your emotionally vulnerabilities. Modern traders have access to tools Livermore could never have imagined: algorithmic executions, instant position sizing calculators, automated stop orders. Yet most still struggle with the same psychological challenges he identified a century ago. They still hold losers too long and sell winners too early. They still let hope override evidence. They still allow ego to dictate decisions. Technology hasn't solved the fundamental problem, because the problem isn't technological, it's human. The power of Livermore's system lies in its acknowledgement of this reality. It doesn't demand superhuman emotional control. It doesn't require perfect market prediction. It simply creates a framework that functions despite normal human limitations. By separating the decision from the moment of execution, by creating rules when you're calm that will guide you when you're not, You bypass the psychological traps that have claimed countless trading accounts. Discipline isn't about never feeling fear or greed. It's about having a system that works even when those emotions are present. The market will test every weakness, exploit every vulnerability, and punish every inconsistency in your approach. But it cannot defeat rules that you follow without exception. This is the enduring legacy of Jesse Livermore's selling strategy, a system that protects traders from their worst enemy themselves. The market will tell you many things throughout your trading career. It will tell you about supply and demand, about human psychology, about the tension between fear and greed that drives prices up and down. But its most valuable lesson, the one Jesse Livermore mastered, is that your greatest opponent will never be external. The real battle isn't against market forces, it's against the voice in your head that whispers just a little longer when you should sell, or it's different this time when you should stick to your rules. What separates the consistent from the failed isn't intelligence or information or even experience. It's the willingness to submit to a system that overrides emotional impulse, to create rules in moments of clarity that will guide you through moments of confusion. Livermore's ultimate insight wasn't about when to sell, it was about when to decide when to sell, and the answer was always the same: before you buy. Every truly successful trader eventually arrives at this understanding. Some find it early and preserve their capital while building their skill. Others find it only after devastating losses have cleared away the illusions of control and superior knowledge. But those who never find it are doomed to repeat the cycle of occasional wins followed by catastrophic losses, gambling rather than trading. The most profound risk in trading isn't found in market volatility or economic uncertainty. It's found in the space between knowing what to do and actually doing it. This execution gap, this moment when knowledge fails to translate into action, is where fortunes disappear. Livermore's selling strategy bridges this gap, not through motivation or willpower or positive thinking, but through the practical mechanism of predetermined rules that require no decision in the moment of maximum psychological pressure. The discipline to follow these rules isn't developed overnight. It's built through repeated small victories over impulse, through the gradual realization that submission to system leads to greater freedom than submission to emotion. Your greatest risk isn't the market, it's the mind behind every trade. What rule will you establish today that will protect you from yourself tomorrow? What psychological trap has consistently undermined your trading success? And most importantly, are you willing to admit that the system must be stronger than the emotion? The market is waiting for your answer.